Where am I? In the hospital? They brought me here to a hospital, I thought. It was very hot and humid. The heavy air was almost stifling. It smelled slightly stale and muggy. I was sweating. Warm moisture beaded on my temples. Then I felt something pressing down lightly on my chest. It felt cool and smooth. I looked down and managed to hold my eyes open long enough to see that my shirt and jacket were pushed up around my shoulders, exposing my chest and abdomen. The strange device curved across my body. It was about 4 or 5 inches thick, and I could feel that it extended from my armpits to a few inches above my belt. It curved down to the middle of each side of my rib cage. It appeared to be made of shiny gray metal or plastic. I looked past the upper edge of the device. I could see the blurry figures of the doctors leaning over me with their white masks and caps. They were wearing unusual orange-colored surgical gowns. I could not make out their faces clearly. Abruptly, my vision cleared. The sudden horror of what I saw rocked me as I realized that I was definitely not in a hospital. I was looking squarely into the face of a horrible creature. It looked steadily back at me with huge, luminous brown eyes the size of quarters. I looked frantically around me. There were 3 of them. I struck out at 2 of them with my right hand, hitting one with the back of my arm, knocking it onto the other one. My swing was more of a push than a blow, and I was so weakened. The one I touched felt soft through the cloth of the garment. The muscles of its puny physique yielded with a sponginess that felt more like fat than sinew. The creature was light and had fallen back easily. I lunged unsteadily to my feet and staggered back against a utensil-arrayed bench that followed the curved wall. I leaned there heavily, keeping my eyes riveted on them. My action had caused the device across my chest to crash to the floor. No wires or tubes were connected to me. My aching body would not do what I told it to do. My legs felt too weak to hold me up. I leaned heavily on the counter. The monstrous trio of humanoids stared towards me. Their hands reached out toward me. With the superhuman effort of a cornered animal, I ground out the strength to defend myself. Fighting the splitting pain in my skull, I grabbed for something on the bench to fend them off with. My hand seized a thin, transparent cylinder about 18 inches long. It was too light to be an effective club. I needed something sharp. I tried to break the tip of the tube. I smashed it against the glass-like wand onto the metal slab that I had been laying on. It would not break. I sprang into a fighting stance with my legs spread wide to brace for an attack. I lashed out with the weapon at the advancing creatures, screaming desperate, hysterical threats. The creatures slowed, but continued towards me, their hands outstretched. "Keep back, damn you," I shrieked. They halted. In a snarling crouch, I held the tube threateningly back behind my head. I felt hopelessly trapped. I was surrounded with my back to the wall. They stood still, mutely. They were a little over 5 feet in height. They had basic humanoid forms, 2 legs, 2 arms, hands with 5 digits each, and a head that was normal to human arrangement features. But beyond the outline, any similarity to humans was terrifyingly absent. Their bones were covered with a thin, marshmallow-looking flesh. They had on a single coverall-type suit made of soft, suede-like material, orangish-brown in color. I saw no buttons, zippers, or snaps. The loose, billowy garments were gathered at their wrists and perhaps at their ankles. They didn't have any kind of raised collar at the neck. They wore simple, pinkish-tan footwear. I could not make out the details of their shoes, but they had very small feet, about a size 4 by our measure. When they extended their hands towards me, I noticed they had no fingernails. Their hands were small, delicate, without hair. Their thin, round fingers looked soft and unwrinkled. Their smooth skin was so pale it looked chalky, like ivory. Their bald heads were disproportionately large for their puny bodies. They had bulging, oversized craniums, a small jaw structure, and an underdeveloped appearance to their features that was almost infantile. Their thin-lipped mouths were narrow. I never saw them open. Lying close to their heads on either side were tiny, crinkled lobes on their ears. Their miniature rounded noses had small oval nostrils. The only facial feature that didn't appear to be underdeveloped were those incredible eyes. Those glistening orbs had brown irises twice the size of normal human eyes, nearly an inch in diameter. They had no lashes. They had no eyebrows. With all the screaming and hysterical questions I had thrown at them, they never once said anything to me. I did not hear them speak to each other. Their mouths never made any sound or motion. Just as I girded myself to spring at them, they abruptly turned and scurried from the room. They went out of the open door, turned right, and disappeared. The anticlimax of the retreat was incredible. The extra adrenaline that had squirted back into my bloodstream left me trembling uncontrollably. I collapsed against the bench, struggling to slow my racing heart. I gulped the heavy air in ragged gasps. Afraid of the aliens' returns, I looked towards the door. I've got to get out of here, I thought frantically, with a surge of determination. There was a curving hallway about 3 feet outside the door. The ceiling of the hall gave off a faint, almost unnoticeable illumination. I looked to the right of the narrow, dimly lit passage in the direction of the aliens, had run. There was no one in sight. Seeing nothing in the passage to my left, I began walking that way. I broke into a frightened run down the narrow corridor. The cramped hallway turned continuously in a continuous curve to the right. I dashed past an open doorway on my left without looking in, only 10 feet down the hall from the door that I had just exited. I caught a glimpse of the room, but was afraid to stop. I saw another doorway to my right. I slowed down to a walk as I neared it. The door was only a few feet ahead on my right, on the inside curve of the hallway. I slowed down, turned, and stopped at the opening. I looked in cautiously. I saw a round room about 16 feet across, with a domed ceiling about 10 feet high. Equally spaced around the room were 3 rectangular outlines resembling closed doorways. No one was there. The room was totally empty except for a single chair that faced away from me. I circled, keeping the distance from the chair, checking to see if anyone was sitting in it. I followed the curve of the wall to get around to where I could see. The chair was unoccupied. There were controls on the chair. On the left arm, there was a single, short, thick lever with an oddly shaped molded handle atop some dark brown material. On the right arm, there was an illuminated lime green screen about 5 inches square with a lot of black lines on it that intersected each other at all angles. Under that, a square of approximately 25 colored buttons arranged in about 5 vertical rows with one color for each row. I looked for symbols or written words and found none. On impulse, I went ahead and pushed one of the green buttons. I looked around the room and listened carefully. Nothing happened. When I pushed the button, I noticed the lines on the screen had moved. I recklessly pushed another green button. The lines rapidly changed angles, sliding down against each other, and then they stopped. I pushed some of the other colored buttons. Nothing happened. Nothing moved, and no sound could be heard. Trembling, I sat down on the hard surface of the chair. I put my hand onto the molded T-grip of the lever. The handle was slightly small for my hand. The whole chair seemed a little too small. I rotated the handle of the lever forward, feeling the slow, fluid resistance of it. I felt suddenly disoriented. Quickly, I pulled my hand off the lever, which returned to its original vertical position. If this thing is flying, I could crash it or throw it off course and get lost or something. I resolved not to tamper with those controls anymore. I might escalate a desperate situation into a fatal disaster. I got out of the chair and walked to the edge of the room. I moved over to one of the rectangles resembling closed doors. I searched the edges for a sign of a switch or an opening mechanism. Seeing none, I put my eye to the crack. I could not see any light. I looked around for some time for a symbol or writing that would help me figure out where I was or how to get out of here. There were none. I walked back to the chair and stood beside it, looking at the buttons. I was thinking about pushing some of them when I heard a faint sound. I whirled around and looked at the door. There, standing in the open doorway, was a human being. I stood frozen to the spot. He was a man about 6 foot 2 inches tall. His helmeted head barely cleared the doorway. He was extremely muscular and evenly proportioned. He appeared to weigh about 200 pounds. He wore a tight-fitting blue suit of soft material like velour. His feet were covered with black boots. A black band or belt wrapped his middle. He carried no tools or weapons on his belt or in his hands. No insignia marked his clothing. I ran up to him, exclaiming, babbling all sorts of questions. The man remained silent through my verbal barrage. He took me firmly but gently by the arm and gestured for me to go with him. He led me out of that room and hurried me down the narrow hallway, pulling me along behind him due to its narrowness. He stopped in front of a closed door that slid open into the wall. I did not see what caused it to open. The door opened into a bare room so small that it was more like a foyer or section of hallway. The door slid shut quietly and silently behind us. Again, I attempted to talk to the man as we stood there. No answer. We spent approximately 2 minutes in the metal cubicle, no more than 7 by 5 by 12 feet. Then a doorway, the same size as the other door, opened opposite of it, and it slid open. A brilliant, warm light that came through the opening into the airlock room was almost like daylight in color and brightness. Fresh, cool air wafted in, reminding me of springtime in the out of doors, making me realize just how dark and stifling this place had been. What a relief the fresh air was. The air moved around me in a softly fluctuating current. I stood and inhaled deeply the clean, cool breeze. The last tinges of the ache in my head and chest almost completely disappeared. I had forgotten about the discomfort that had been with me constantly since I regained consciousness. I descended a short, steep ramp, 6, 7, 8 feet to the floor. I looked around to discover that, although I was outside that dim, humid craft, I was not out of doors. I was in a huge room. The ceiling was sectioned off into alternating rectangles of dark metal and those that gave off light. The ceiling itself was curved down to form a larger wall in the room. The room was shaped like a quarter of a cylinder laid on its side. The outside of the craft we had just left was shaped like the one we had seen in the woods, but it was very much larger, about 60 feet in diameter and 16 feet high. It did not emit light. Instead, it had a surface of a shiny brushed metal luster. It seemed to radiate a faint heat from the hull. The craft either sat flat on its bottom, or if it had legs, they were only a few inches high. It sat nearly in the middle of the large room. On my left, toward one end of the large room, there were 2 or 3 oval-shaped saucers, reflecting light like highly polished chrome. I could see 2 of them very clearly, and a silvery reflection that could have been another shiny, rounded craft. They were about 40 to 50 feet in diameter, quite a bit smaller than the angular vehicle I had just come out of. I saw no projections or breaks in the smooth, shiny, flattened spheres. They sat on very rounded bottoms, and I could not see how they balanced that way. The man escorted me across the open floor to a door that opened silently and quickly from the middle downward. We were in a hallway about 6 feet wide, illuminated from the 8-foot-high ceiling, which was one long panel of softly diffused light. The hallway was straight and perhaps 8 feet long. Closed double doors were distributed along the corridor. At the end of the hallway, there were another pair of double doors. I watched closely this time. I did not see him touch anything, but again the doors slid silently back from the middle. We entered a white room approximately 15 feet square, with another 8-foot ceiling. The room had a table and a chair in it, but my immediate interest focused on the 3 other humans. 2 men and 1 woman were sitting around the table. They were all wearing velvety blue uniforms like the first man's, except they had no helmets. The 2 men had the same muscularity and the same masculine good looks as the first man. The woman had a beautiful face and figure. They were smoothly skinned and